All right, Joe, you disappeared from my screen. But go
Still
ahead and
there, don't worry,
oh,
I'm
there,
still there.
perfect. Okay, great. So why don't you start off by doing a little introduction about who you are and Landscape VC?
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Joe. I'm the founder of a startup called Landscape. Started Landscape about 2.5 years ago now after doing another startup straight out of university. So studied computer science, graduated, built one startup which went kind of okay-ish, and then moved on to Landscape. Started very much as a side project, thinking like, I don't want to raise any money. I just want to make a bit of side money type thing, like building something that I thought should exist, which was the VC review platform. So essentially allowing founders to kind of share their experiences with different VCs and help other founders get an understanding of who's good, who's bad, who's a potential time waster, so on, so on. Did end up raising money, and have been, I guess, kind of battling away for the last couple of years, trying to find product market fit on something commercial. We've launched along the way an awesome founder community called Anonymous Founders, about 2,000 founders in a Slack group chatting about the good, the bad, the ugly of all things founder life. We launched a product that failed, so happy to chat a little bit more about that. Pretty grim situation. And recently we launched a new product, still under the brand of Landscape, but a new product which is kind of a market intelligence service for investors, and that one's been going relatively well.
One of the reasons we're so excited to have you for our first session is you work with a lot of investors, you've raised money, and then you also sell to investors. So there's a lot to dive into. And this week is talking all about kind of what matters most to investors, especially when you're raising your seed round. So I want to start off talking about your own fundraising journey.
Yeah.
Tell us, like, I know you launched with the like kind of Glassdoor review sites. So at what stage did you raise, and what were you raising with? Was it with the vision, or was it with traction at that point?
I think my fundraising journey is quite unconventional, to be honest with you, and it's not how I would advise people to go around fundraising. But we launched well, I say we, it was like the royal we. It was just me at the time. Launched the review site. It started getting real traction. Like we had 1,000 founders had left reviews. It was all over Twitter. Like we were featured in TechCrunch, like talking about it a lot. And the challenge was that it wasn't generating any money. Like I had no idea how to monetize it essentially. But we had really good product traction, user traction, and it was just me hacking stuff together in the evenings and the weekends. And as a result of the product itself, I was getting exposure to a lot of investors. At one point, one investor said to me, one angel said, "Look, if you ever raise money, please come and tell me," type thing. So I think it was back end of 2020. I was like, okay, well, let's raise a bit of cash, so at least then I can kind of carry on working on it. Really was the main thing. I was trying to raise 250, ended up closing I think 500 in the first round, and later another 900. We can get to that afterwards. And really the premise of the fundraise was look, I know that a VC review platform isn't a particularly large business. It's certainly not a venture scale opportunity, right? But it was growing really fast. It was growing organically. It was just me working on it. People seemed to really, really care about it. And so really the proposition for my funding round was, I think there's something valuable in here. I would just like some time to figure out what it is, essentially. And I guess, as I said, very, very unconventional. I didn't go in with a business model or I had a very basic pitch deck. We had good traction, but it was more look, something valuable can be built in this market. We're gaining access to this market. I'd like to raise money to kind of buy myself time. And I guess the thing I should say is that fundraising was very, very different in 2021. Cash was being thrown around left, right, and center. I think now if I went with this to the market with the same proposition, I think I'd be laughed out of most investor meetings. But even in a couple of years, lots has changed.
Did you have any problems with investors who had got like bad reviews on your platform and they weren't interested in talking to you about investment?
So at the time, like, yes, we have had problems with that. Like, not many, actually, to be honest with you. Like, most VCs, when they get a negative review, are kind of in the mindset of like, look, no business ever gets
Yeah.
always 100% 5-star reviews, and they just view it as like a learning experience. We have had some funds that have reacted quite negatively. But when I raised capital, so the 500k I raised, in fact, all of the money I've ever raised has only been from angel investors, and we don't do like angel reviews. Like, it's quite a we might do in the future, but it's quite a bit harder because you're reviewing like an individual person rather than a business. So like opening up to like defamation, libel, all that stuff is a lot more difficult. And so actually, it ended up being pretty straightforward. Like, no angel had any reviews and no angel had any problem. And the great thing was that everybody that I raised money from was like, look, we don't really know where this is going to go, but what you're building, we think should exist in the market. And so there was kind of that angle to it as well.
And so you mentioned you raised 900K after that one. How much further down the line was that?
So that was about, say, like 12 months later, I think, roughly. And that was like and this is where like we got things really wrong, actually, to be honest with you. Like, that was like okay, we've been looking at the market, like the review platform's growing. We tested monetization on the review platform, but like it just, and we got some MRR coming in, but it just wasn't enough and it wasn't going to scale. And so like I basically decided to like cut that revenue stream and looked at the market. Like, at the time I was doing a lot of scouting for venture funds, and I looked at like the scouting model and thought it was pretty crap, to be honest with you. Like, there were lots of people with deal flow who weren't getting like any compensation for their deal flow. It was kind of one-sided. And every fund at the time wanted a scout network. So we basically decided to build this platform called Open Scout. It was basically like a decentralized scouting network. Anybody could sign up as a venture scout. Funds could sign up, receive deal flow, and pay a scout a fee if they did a deal. And that was when I was like, okay, this is like a really big product. Like, it's going to take a while to build. It's going to take money to build. And so I went back out to market looking to fundraise to build this product, essentially. Went back out to market to angels, who ended up raising from like about 100 angel investors.
Wow.
So yeah, pretty high volume of angels, with the aim of like, look, we're building this, we're putting it out to market. Here's how the business model is going to work. Like, here's how we're going to get our first scouts, deals, so on, so on. So the second fundraise, still all under landscape, but the second fundraise was very much like, hey, look, I think we have something now. Like, we need some cash to build it and test it, and so on, so on.
And so when did you launch Open Scout?
We launched it right when the market fell apart, which was, I think, August 2022, or yeah, like July 2022, essentially. So July last year. So we'd spent like 9 months building it. Out of nowhere, the market just collapsed. Like, that's not the reason the product didn't end up working, but like, it was definitely a contributing factor. But launched it July 2022 after kind of having spent 6 months building it, I would say. And I mean, candidly, like, probably far too large of a team for like a pre-product market fit company.
And so, okay, so you went from at what point in this did you launch the Slack community?
That was really early, actually. Like, that was probably like the second thing we ever launched. Like, we had the review platform. Heaps of founders were like, oh my God, this is so good. Like, thank God I can finally talk like about my investor experiences. And one day it just kind of struck me. I was like, oh, okay, like, if founders like sharing and feel safe anonymously sharing their investor experiences, like, being a founder myself, there's lots of like shit that you have to deal with basically, like, on a regular basis. And it can be hard to talk to people about that stuff like under your real identity. Everybody always wants to give the impression of like, we're smashing it, we're killing it. Like, you have to project that to your investors, you want to project it to your peers, like, you have to project it to your team if you have a team. And so the idea generally was just like a safe space for founders to kind of talk about the stuff that otherwise is quite difficult to talk about. So launched that, I would say, maybe like 2 years ago now, and I think we've got about 2,000 founders in there now. And despite everything we've ever built, like all the money we've spent on developers and code and all this sort of stuff, like a Slack group is probably still the most loved thing we've ever created.
Well, I love it. If anyone hasn't signed up for it, we'll put the link in the chat later. It's amazing. It's so juicy, even just like for the entertainment value.
Yeah.
But how did you, I think like this is a similar position to a lot of the founders in our program where maybe you've launched an engaged community, but it's, you know, you're not monetizing it. So like, how do you use that to capture investor interest, especially those who are like, you know, they don't see the direct ROI. And sometimes it's really difficult to capture the fact that people who are super passionate about what you're doing when it's not like tangible yet.
So honestly, it's like really, really difficult. I launched like the anonymous founder community, like the review platform, because I thought it just should exist. Like not because like there was some like wider business ROI involved in it. I just thought it was like something that founders could benefit from. And when I launched Landscape, one of my things was like, I just never want to charge founders for anything. And so that was always like a kind of North Star of us as a company and how I was thinking about Landscape. Like, look, how can we support as many founders as possible for free? In terms of like when pitching investors, like I didn't even include it in the deck, to be honest with you. Like if people asked about like, hey, do you have like a founder community, or like how are you going to engage with founders? I always followed up with like, well, actually we have like 2,000 founders in a Slack group. They talk all day, every day. They go on, so on, so on. But I think specifically when talking to investors, I think if you have a strong community, it's like it's a good sign for your go-to-market strategy, but it's like not really anything past that. Like monetizing communities is quite hard, and monetizing typically, like if you have a community that you're monetizing, like they can make great businesses, but they are unlikely to make great venture scale businesses. And so like I think it's difficult to attract investment if your main value prop is like we have a community.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the go-to-market slide, like that's where you can show that, hey, you're already engaging with like everyone who you want to be using your product in the future. But yeah, leading with it just is not enough.
Yeah,
to
it's like, hey, look, people already care about what we're doing, and like here's the proof. Like, and having a community before you have a product like is a good sign. It's just not like, it's not, especially like these days, like in the fundraising environment, it's just not enough to like raise capital on a loan type thing.
I really want to ask about what it's like having 100 angel investors on your cap table and what that process was like. But just for the sake of time, I want to talk a bit about Open Scout, and you mentioned like, you know, didn't go as planned. So hopefully we have more time to circle back from that, or founders, please ask more about that during the Q&A. But talk to me about like, at what point did you realize after launch it wasn't going to plan?
So it was kind of a weird situation. Like we decided we were going to build it. And I was like, okay, well, what's the go-to-market type thing? Like, how do we make sure on the day we launch, we have users, because it was a marketplace. You got like scouts on this side, Yeast on the other, with deals in the middle. And like marketplaces are notoriously hard to like kickstart. Like you need supply and demand. So whilst we were building it, I made the decision to announce it. And so we went to Sifted and said, look, you've been writing loads about scout networks. We're building like a productized scout network. We had maybe like 1,000, 2,000 scouts apply to scout on our platforms. So before we even launched, I was like, okay, boom, we've got supply side. Like we got to the point where we were able to like hand pick the scouts that we wanted. So like we could ensure quality on the supply side. So everybody kind of, well, I say everybody, like it felt like everybody kind of knew about it. The Sifted piece got shared widely. Like we were like, hey, this is going to work. This is amazing. We're unstoppable. We're invincible. Like there's no way we're possibly going to fail type thing. It ended up taking longer to build than we thought, which is like just typical, right? So I think it was about 6 months later we launched. All the meanwhile, people were like, when's it launching? When's it launching? And I was like, oh, I wish it was launching right now, but you know, it's taking a little bit longer. And we launched on the first week. We onboarded like 300 scouts. By the first month, we had like 500 scouts and 50 funds, 50 VC funds. Then the market started tanking and doing like, everybody was just like not investing. Like it really, 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 really slowed down. But I would say after 2 months, we had like maybe like 800 deals had been sourced by scouts. We had 100 venture funds on and maybe like 600 scouts. But the challenge was just like deals weren't getting done. Like the quality of deal flow that we had was like high enough that I was happy. Like I was like, yeah, these companies, I mean, not all of them, right? But like these companies will get funded. Like they weren't like somebody opening a restaurant or whatever it might be. Like there's nothing wrong with opening a restaurant, but like it's not what typically VCs are looking for. And so after about 2 months, I started getting and like every founder's had them like the nerves of like, oh shit, like this might actually not work. And the goalpost has really shifted. Like when I raised money from my angels the second round, the discussion was around like, look, like if you can prove this marketplace works and get like 2, 3, 4 deals done, like that'll probably be enough to go out and raise again, like raise a larger amount of capital. And I started looking at it thinking like, okay, we had maybe like 8 months runway left or something, like a pretty big team. Like we were burning more cash than we should have been burning for like pre-product market fit. And all of a sudden, like getting 2, 3, 4 deals done was not going to be anywhere near enough to like raise another round. And so essentially I was kind of trapped between a rock and a hard place whereby like the product was working. Like we hadn't perfected the business model at all by any stretch of the imagination, but like people cared about the product, they were using it. We had VCs logging on daily, scouting deals. But I was looking at it thinking like, okay, there's no way that this product can get us to like sustainability, like break even, like or even profitable. Like that would take quite a long time and we'll run out of money before then. And like with the market moving so much, the goalposts have moved so much that I think it's going to be really difficult for us to even hit the milestones we would need to raise more capital. And so essentially like ended up shutting down the product and just being like, I think I basically like had like 3 weeks where I was like, if we continue down this path, I think the company will fail. Like I still really believe in the product. Like honestly, like I think if AngelList launched it tomorrow, I think it would pop. Like they don't have to worry about runway or like getting the next milestones for their funding round or whatever. I still really, really, truly believe in like a decentralized scouting network. But like the way the market moved, the traction that we needed, the amount we were burning, like I think we were just on like a one-way track to failing. And there was always the option of like we could potentially go back to our existing investors and say, hey, we need a bit more cash, like can you support us for a bridge round or whatever it might be. But you never really want to do that, to be honest with you. Like you want to be raising from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. So I ended up closing it down 3.5 months after we launched it, which was probably the worst time of my life.
What did you do after that?
So after that, we still had like cash in the bank, but we had a big team. So I had to essentially like let everybody go, which was like devastating. Probably like the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Like my team was absolutely amazing. They did nothing wrong. It was kind of my fault on the product direction, obviously market changing, but you got to kind of account for that. So made the decision that I needed to let everybody go. We went from a team of like 9 down to a team of 3. So really, really downsized, but we moved from like 5 months runway to like a year's runway, which, I was always like really confident that like I'd figure something out, basically, as long as I had time and as long as I had like cash in the bank to keep things going. Like I looked at it and we had enough money in the bank that was still like a good pre-seed round. And so I was looking at it saying like, okay, Like, we have good market penetration already. Like, the brand of Landscape is known, like, around the ecosystem. Like, the review platform is still in the background, still growing every month. Like, people are still posting reviews, but it's kind of non-commercial. And so I just said, okay, let's go into cockroach mode, like, not die, do anything we possibly can to not die, and just explore new opportunities, essentially. And that's what we did. And so it was a really grim time, like letting everybody go. But going from like 5 months runway to 12 months, like the amount of stress that takes off you, like I felt like I was able to like think clearly for like the first time in a while, and honestly just went back to the drawing board and said, like, okay, what do we have? We have a large community of founders. We have networked with most of the VCs in Europe. Okay, well, that's pretty good distribution, like if we can come up with the right product type thing. And so tested a few ideas, essentially.
One of the things that I think is really impressive is, like, you mentioned a few times where you realized something wasn't going to work, like trying to monetize the review platform, or having to say, like, hey, I know we're building something with the review platform, but like, I'm not really sure where it's going to go in the future. And then this, like, it seems like you kind of come to the conclusion or next steps, or like where things aren't going wrong pretty quickly. I mean, even 3 months is like a really short period of time to come to that decision. How do you, I guess, like, how do you go through these moments where like maybe you have the first thought in your mind, like, okay, this isn't going to work, to like, okay, here's the actual outcome? What does that period look like?
So I think with like when you like pivot, there's like a couple of different types of pivoting. Like if something's just not work, like with Open Scout, like if we had 2 years money in the bank and we weren't pressurized with runway or anything like that, like I think we could have made that product work, to be honest with you. Like genuinely, like we had all of the initial like grassroots stuff that you'd kind of want to look for like 3 months into the product. But like that was honestly almost a bit of a forced pivot, in the sense that I was like, it's not going to generate enough cash that we can keep the lights on, and I don't think I'm going to hit the milestones we need to fundraise. And so then it's like, well, you end up like with a slow death, basically. And so that one was a bit more like, okay, if I want Landscape to survive, like if I want this company to keep going, like we have to pivot. Like this product just isn't going to work. So I think like that was more like pivoting for survival. I think like another, I don't know, it's like you get, as a founder, like you get vibes when something isn't working. Like, and I'm like a massive proponent of pivoting. I think it's like really powerful. Now, you don't have to do like a large pivot. Like if you have a product that's in a market that people are using, but maybe they're churning, nonstop, whatever it might be, like you can pivot into a new product into the same market. And that's actually quite a bit of an easier pivot, which is what we did, because you already have the distribution. Like you already have like, hey, look, that didn't work. Can you, and this is exactly what we did, went back to the VCs that were using Open Scout and said, hey, look, we've shut that down. It didn't work. Sorry about that. We're building something new. Do you want to check it out? And I messaged on WhatsApp 10 VCs. All 10 said, yeah, I'd love to check it out. And then all 10 agreed to pay before we'd even built it. And so that was like a soft pivot. That was like, okay, we're still pivoting into the same market. But I don't know, I think it's really hard knowing when to pivot. I think like you have to kind of be like honest with yourself a lot of the time, which is quite hard to do. I think it was maybe a little bit easier for me because like I never really, with Landscape, being really candid about it, like never had like a big vision. It was like quite an opportunistic company. Like I love building stuff for this market. And so it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm deviating from my big vision and my mission and all this sort of stuff. Like it was like, okay, where's the next opportunity?
For as my next question, founders, raise your hand. Pretty much everyone in here has raised capital. I think most people have raised, it's like an average of 280K within this cohort. So put your hands up. You can use the little emoji if you've pivoted since you raised your first amount of money or since launch. I kind of want to get a feel of whether or not we should talk more about pivoting or about other stuff. Okay, one hand, fair amount of hands. Okay, and put in the chat too, if you have any questions around pivoting, because there's a few other topics to cover as well. But while we're seeing what people say, Joe, talk to me about what you're launching now.
So we launched basically what I kind of realized was like looking at the market is like we had I never wanted to charge founders for anything. So I was like, okay, well then if we want to make money in this market, like we have to charge the other side of the market. We have to charge investors. And what I kind of realized like through trial and error was like some of the stuff that we had that was great was deal flow. Like we had a lot of deal flow. Like we saw a lot of founders that were fundraising. We had access to information that founders were actively fundraising, so on. But what I kind of learned was that like the market doesn't pay for deal flow. Like most investors won't pay. They're like, hey, look, I've got so much deal flow myself. Like, I don't need to pay for deal flow. It's almost like an admission of weakness. And so I kind of started looking at this idea of like a market intelligence platform. And I had this idea whereby like, what if we could tell investors like when anybody in the world became a founder, so like, hey, this person who previously did X, Y, and Z just started a business today type thing. There was like a big trend of like lots of VCs wanting to become more data driven, and there was a big trend of everybody wanting to go earlier, so seeing companies at the earliest stage possible. So I kind of had this like rough idea of like, okay, well, what if we could like build something that gave them signals like, oh, this person just became a founder, or like this GitHub repository is trending, or this person just followed this investor on Twitter. And so kind of more market intelligence than deal flow. And so I basically like wanted to stay as lean as possible. We had like 3 people in the team at this point. I designed it in Figma over a weekend. Looked pretty crappy, to be honest with you, but kind of did the job. Showed it, messaged 10 VCs that I was quite close with and said, hey, look, we're building this. Can you have a look at it type thing? All 10 were like, yeah, would love to have a look at it. I then asked all 10, like, hey, look, like, would you pay for this type thing? Like, would you pay for like a pilot? Like my mindset was like revenue. Like never know if the market's going to recover. I'm sure it will at some point, but like I no longer want to be dependent on raising external capital. I want to build a business that like can look after itself type thing. And so I asked all 10 like, hey, would you pay, I don't know, like 3K for like a 3-month license for this? And all 10 were like, yeah, we'll pay 3K. And so I was like, okay, well, we've just done more revenue for a product that hasn't even launched than we've done in the entire company's history previously. And that was kind of the signal for me that was like, okay, like we should build this type thing. Like if you're kind of making money from something and people are willing to pay like before there's anything there. And so I basically said to everybody, okay, cool, give me 2 months, we'll build it. Like, can you pay now, please? Here's the Stripe link. And I'll just let you know when it's live type thing. Everybody paid, and we've kind of grown from there. And we now work with maybe like 30, 40 funds all over the world, paying a pretty good contract value. And we had like our first ever profitable month 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. So we're like on the track to like not dying anymore, which is quite a relief.
I think there's really something to like one, doing the MVP obviously as small as possible, but like it really can't, there's so much you can do with like clever invoicing in order to get cash in the door to build, whether that is like invoicing up front or offering people a discount if they like pay faster, so you can just get cash in the door. Like sometimes that makes all the difference. But for the last little bit before we jump to Q&A, and as Purdy said, if you were raising your hand for my question before, put it down. If you want to ask a question now, put your hand up. I'll put it in the chat. Talk to me about your relationship with your investors during this time. Like, what have you learned about communicating bad news and also like making sure investors still have faith in you?
I think best thing is probably just like honesty is the best policy. Like I have, heaps of angels. I send a monthly update every single month. I don't think I've ever missed one in like 2.5 years. And I just share like great, good, bad, ugly. And then like financial highlights type thing. And so I think like just by keeping that like monthly cadence, like you build trust. If I'm really honest, I think when I sent the email to say, hey, look, we're shutting down Open Scout, like we're going to go through some sort of pivot, figuring it out, laid off pretty much all the team. I think probably like most of my angels probably wrote us off then, to be honest with you. Like, I think they were probably like, okay, that was the product that we, were pitched. It didn't work. This one's going to zero type thing. And that's like quite a difficult mindset to overcome, I guess, a little bit. Like, you almost have to be like, right, gonna prove them wrong. But like, I've always been like, I can't wait to return cash to my investors at some point. And so like, I've always been like, no, like the show goes on. Like, I think as a founder who has taken money from investors, like you owe it to your investors to give at bare minimum your absolute everything until you literally can't give any more. And so I was just honest with people. My investors were mostly supportive. I think when you say to people like, yeah, we shut down the product, we've laid everybody off, we're going to go for a pivot, and they're like, oh, what are you pivoting to? And it's like, no, I don't really know yet. Like, I'm going to kind of figure it out over the next kind of month. I think that's probably a bit like, oh yeah, sure, you're going to figure it out type thing. But then like when I sent an email 2 months later saying, hey, we did 30K revenue this month or something, or whatever it was, I think everybody was a bit like, oh shit, like, this is kind of back on. And when I sent out our investor update a couple of months ago and mentioned that we had our first profitable month, there were like a couple of angels that replied, were like, where the hell's this come from type thing. And it was like quite a nice feeling to be like, look, we're still in the game, we're still grafting away, like there's still something here, like but yeah, it's difficult. Like it's really, really difficult.
It's great getting to prove people wrong, but it's like kind of shitty when it's your investors that you want to
yeah
prove
the thing
wrong.
I kept coming back to is that like at pre-seed most of the time the investors are backing you, like not the company. Like they might have some vague interest in the company, like, and they might think, oh yeah, this could be really big if it goes right, but actually a lot of the time they're like backing the individual. And I think particularly in Landscape's case, I honestly believe that most of the people were like, oh, okay, well, I think Joe will figure something out. Like, and he's got enough traction in the market that there might be something there. And so, like, I just felt like when we shut Open Scout down, laid everybody off, I was like, okay, well, investors have backed me. They didn't back Open Scout; they've backed me. And so, like, the minimum I need to do is like just keep pushing. Like,
when you were raising, I guess like both of your rounds, because you had like good buzz around the product, were you like capturing that in terms of, okay, like the signups to the platform, or how many reviews have been posted, how many people, what you already said the bit about not talking about the community, but like what are you doing to I guess like get the interest, but talk about, because it doesn't sound like you were painting a very like a super specific vision on what you wanted to build in the future. So what were the sort of like conversations around what you were using the money for?
And probably worth noting is like the first thing I only raised from angels, so I didn't have like the super extended due diligence period of venture capital investing. I raised the first round of 500K was like, I mentioned the traction. I was like 300 funds have registered on our platform. We have like 1,000 reviews. So I included like some stuff in there. For the second round, it was more about like, hey, look, this is Open Scout, and if this works, like, this is what it could become, and this is what the world might look like. And I think it's like, I was kind of a little bit privileged in that sense, because like my first round was like, hey, look, we've got some traction on this, but actually I think there's something better we can build. And my second round was like, hey, we're gonna build this. And so like, the traction I was able to show was like, well, we've already had 1,000 scouts apply to Scout on our platform, which was just an Airtable list and an Airtable form on our website. But there were because the product wasn't launched, there were no rock solid metrics, which in some ways kind of makes it easier to raise, because you don't have to show that like graph that's going like this or whatever it might be.
One of the things, and this is the last question I'll ask before I open up to Q&A, and Jolly, you have to correct me on your name. We're going to go to you first for questions in like a minute. One of the things that has, I think, surprised, like that Purdy and I talk about a lot, is like, you know, we have a lot of investors in for Q&A sessions and doing like our investor fund speed dating and stuff like that. And it's just so funny dealing with investors, like realizing, okay, they're very human, like they get bored, they're as susceptible to like FOMO as everyone else, and there's so much like just really human elements that go into fundraising rounds. What have you learned from having investors like use your product, you know, read the reviews on your product, and like also, you know, invest? What sort of things like change your mind, or what things were you surprised about?
Honestly, I think pretty much exactly what you said, that like investors are just normal people with a bit of cash. Like, you know, they're not like God's gift to the planet. They're not like you know, whatever else you want to call it. Like, I think actually, like one thing that you can do when you're speaking to investors is just treat them like normal people, essentially, and just like aim to build a relationship. And that is more likely going to end up in cash than you know, a super hard pitch and so on. And like just, I don't know, just like not being totally enamored by the fact like, oh my God, I'm talking to an investor type thing. Like just treat, I think that's a pretty easy way for investors to be like, oh, okay, this founder's a bit naive or a bit green or whatever it might be. And just treating them like normal people. Like these are people who have some cash, they want to invest in startups. That's why they're talking to you. You've just got to kind of sell them on, you know, you and what you're up to. But yeah, I mean, now like I have, you know, I would count a lot of people on my cap table as like my friends now. Lots of friends that invest. And yeah, it's kind of weird. It's just like, yeah, they're just, when I was like younger doing my first business, I was like, oh my God, like we're chatting to an investor tomorrow, like super nervous about it. Now I'm just more of a like, you know, chatting to an investor. If they like it, great. If they don't, hey, no worries, it's cool. Like, you know, there's more investors out there.
Hey, okay, Jolly, you're up first.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Great, cool. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And my startup is called Horizon. We are a digital health company that is optimizing health and performance, basically. We are raising, well, I don't know, call it pre-seed or seed, kind of like, because we do have an MVP. But
Yeah.
I think the question I have, if it's okay, I have two. One is about pivoting. We are actually pivoting now while we are raising a fund round.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like thinking about the metrics that you know, we had before is quite different than the metrics we have now. And also, I guess kind of like it's a bit complex question, is in the current climate, when we talk to investors, many of them asking us for, you know, revenue, prove our business models, when at our stage we found it is ridiculous or impossible because we are pivoting, you know, things change all the time. So what's your experience in that one? And I guess another one, because you have raised a large round with angels, did you go out with individual angels, or did you go out with like angels collective or angels fund? Thank you.
So second one first, like went after individual angels and also syndicates. So we have like 4 or 5 syndicates that invested, maybe average ticket was like 70K through the syndicates. And then I have a whole bunch of individual angels who invested their own capital. It's a bit more time consuming because you have more conversations, but it's great because like some of them will just be like, yeah, I'm in at the end of the 30-minute call, as opposed to kind of dragging on for ages and ages. On your first point, I haven't been through this myself in terms of like fundraising whilst pivoting. My gut feel is that like without being like a harbinger of doom, like I think it's going to be really difficult to fundraise while pivoting, because like you said, like, you know, they're asking for metrics, and like, yeah, you have metrics, but on something that you're pivoting away from. And so you have no metrics on something that you're pivoting into. And I think one of the challenges with fundraising is like your messaging just needs to be extremely clear. Like you need to say like, hey, this is what we've done. This is now what we're doing. This is the ask. Like it needs to be crystal clear. And I think pivoting mid fundraise, like if you have to do it, like because you're running out of cash and the product's not working, like it's unavoidable, right? But like I think just expect that it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And I would focus mostly on we did this, here's why it didn't work, but here's what we learned, and here's how we want to apply those learnings moving forward. And we spotted a bigger opportunity or a better opportunity that we're raising capital for. So focus more on like what we did, what we learned, why it didn't work, and where the really exciting stuff is coming up.
Great, thank you.
All right, Edward.
Hi there, Edward from Offblocks. We're an embedded finance software for Web3 developers. Currently going through a fundraise, so just raised the 70K out of the first 200K tranche that we're looking to raise before Christmas. And I had a few questions just around your pipeline, basically. Like, so just to go through those two separate rounds, like how many people do you reach out to? What's your conversion rate at each step? And maybe if you can tell us a bit more about what your process is from, you know, sending out the Calendly effectively to check it in the bank.
So I think conversion was like crazy high. I honestly don't know why, but it was probably like over 90%, I think, like in terms of like investors that I talked to that ended up committing. I think I probably had like maybe 10 no's over the fundraising period. Honestly, couldn't tell you why. Like, I think like you know, people liked the product we were going to be building. It was in a market that they understood, which really helps. Like, if you don't have to spend the first 15 minutes of every conversation explaining your market, explaining the opportunity. So I think that really helped. In terms of building up the pipeline, from my previous company, I had like 2 or 3 or 4 angels that I knew. So went out to them first and said, look, I'm building something new. I know the last one didn't go so well. Like, do you want to have a look at what I'm building now? And they said, yes, they were my first commits. That was my first 100K. After that, I leveraged existing, like if somebody committed, I'd be like, okay, who else do you know? Like, do you have any other great angels that I should be speaking to? And like, just really leveraged that, actually, like really leveraged that. And that's how I ended up getting probably the majority of my other angels. I think I maybe did like less than 10 outbounds, I would say, and just focused really hard on like, hey, this person's it. And once you get somebody in, if they're like a good person, so I had like certain people in my round that were like catalysts, basically. So one of them was Damian Lane, who was previously like episode 1 Ventures. Like, when he came in, like he then introduced me to like 4 or 5 other investors who also came in. And of those 4 or 5, they then introduced me to 2 or 3 who came in. And like, you'll find with angels that there's lots of like people following people type thing. And so like, you know, if I was able to say like, hey, person X, you know, they always ask like, hey, who else is in the round? And if you can say like, hey, person X, Y, and Z are in the round, immediately they're more like, oh, whoa, like they're in, like, okay, cool, like I should definitely be in that. And so that was kind of my approach to pipeline. I think I was really obnoxious about it as well, because I believe in cold outbound, but I also think it's extremely hard to differentiate when you're cold outbounding. And I think some investors, not all, and whether it's right or wrong is like a different topic, but I think some investors view cold outbound as like a bit of a negative signal. You know, you can't work the network to find an introduction to me, whatever it might be. And so I just really hyper focused on like leveraging my network and growing it out from there, really.
Joe, I think that's like